Okay, good morning, everybody. Glad to see y'all here. My name is Professor Tebow. I am not a doctor like a lot of your other teachers are. I am teaching this class because I have a law degree, but I do not, which technically is a doctorate degree, but lawyers don't go by doctor. So y'all call me Professor Tebow, Mr. Tebow, Tom, whatever you want to call me, I will answer to. I get called Dr. Tebow a lot too, so that's fine as well. So this is my first, I've been teaching this class as a part-time professor for a while, for several years. And then this is my first semester as a full-time professor. So I had been teaching in person and in-online for the last 3 or 4 years. And then starting this semester, I am teaching all of the sections for business law except for the in-person 6 o'clock night class. I think that is going to be taught by a local judge, Mark D'Antonio. So most everybody that has business law will have me for this class. I don't know about you guys, but going back to ancient times when I was in school, it always took me by surprise on the first day of class. It's like I always pretended that it was not going to happen until it got here. Not mentally prepared, so it's weird this morning to wake up and be like, oh, I can't believe we actually have class. But we do, so I don't know if you guys are that way or not. So I'm going to go through just some basics of how this works, how I teach the class, what the expectations are. I'll invite you to raise your hand, shout out questions at any point, and I'll give you a chance to ask them when I'm done. But I'm going to go through that fairly fast today, and then we're going to jump right into the first week's lecture. So we're going to hit the ground running today. I think I mentioned that there's a seating chart, so I want you guys to stick to that. I will learn your names eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, but this is a class where I will know who you are and I will call on you. This is a class that I think is important for us to have participation and discussion. It's usually, fortunately for me and hopefully for you, it's usually a class that folks are interested in. We talk about a lot of current stuff. It's not as dry as maybe some of the other business topics. And that's not to throw shade at anybody else's class, but all that is to say, I just feel like I'm lucky to have a class that people are generally interested in. And so the class discussion part happens pretty organically. It's not really pulling teeth. So now that I'm full-time, I do have an office here. I think it is, I just found out where it was this morning. I've never been to it, nor do I have a key, but I will be getting one. It is room 423. I'll put this in the syllabus, but one of the reasons I did not post the syllabus yet is I didn't know where my office was. So I want to be able to put that down, and I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to work office hours because in addition to teaching here full-time, I still am expected to carry on a full-time law practice, which I do and will do. And so I'm really not on campus much except for to teach my classes. But that is not meant to say that I'm going to be any less accessible to you than your other professors. I'm always welcome meetings with you guys in person or Zoom or telephone calls. I can set those up any time of the day. I can do that from here. I can do that from my office downtown. It doesn't matter. So anytime you need to meet, we can do that anyway. Just because I don't necessarily maybe have as expansive office hours as some other professors does not mean that you won't be able to get a hold of me if you need to. The best way to contact me is going to be on my cell phone. I will post that in the syllabus. You are welcome to use that. I get it a lot. It does not bother me at all. I find that that's the best, you guys know these days, I feel like nowadays even voicemail is outdated. Like, if you got something to say, just text me. Like I get all these unlistened to voicemails. So texting is just the best way to do it. I'll give you both my work email and my CSU email, and I do check both of them. The work email is a little bit faster. It pops up on me a little bit more, but I'll check them all. But mostly if you want to get a hold of me, text is the best way to do it. For my in-person class. I do have an attendance policy. I'm sorry to report to you. But my theory is twofold. One is that I remember from my own experience, and I know from teaching, from being a student and a teacher, you do better in a class when you come. That's just the way it is. And then secondly, just from selfishly, if I have to be here, then so do y'all. If I'm going to come over here and teach and speak and do all this, then you're going to come and listen to what I have to say. So I do have an attendance policy. It's 4 absences. I don't need to know if you have an excused or unexcused, unless you're an athlete, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But there are 4 absences to use however you want. That way you don't have to approve them. I don't have to approve them. It's not, this was grandmama died or I'm sick or something. You just use them however you want. You do not have to tell me why you're not here. But after 4, I'll drop you from the class. So you got 4 to use however you want. Now, are there extenuating circumstances? Yeah, there always are. Somebody could give birth. Somebody could go in the hospital to have a surgery. COVID is certainly a variable that we deal with now. I think I've already got somebody in this class who has COVID and they obviously can't be on campus. I'm not going to count COVID against you. But I am going to make you prove to me you have COVID. So anybody thinking I'm just going to use COVID to get some extra absences, that isn't going to work either. And I know that I don't mean to come across as harsh, but that's just my policy. So you guys are all grown-ups. I feel like 4 absences out of 30 class periods is a pretty good, pretty reasonable amount to give you. So just keep that in mind. I try to warn you if you get close to 4 absences, but don't count on that. I mean, that's not my responsibility to keep up with I do keep up with your absences, but if you're getting close to 4, that's on you, not me. If I see it, I might mention to you, hey, you're getting a little close, but you don't rely on me to make sure that you're, close to the limit. If you have a question about how many absences you have, then by all means, let me know and I'll check my records to see. I will take the roll at the beginning of every class, but I stop taking it at 9:30 when the doors close. So if you come in late, you got to come down here and let me know that you are here so I can mark you as present. We do start right at 9:30. I used to teach 8 a.m. and we never got started till about 8:10 or 8:15 because that's just early and that was rough on folks. But 9:30, I think everybody can be here at 9:30. So please try to be punctual. We do not have a textbook. I finally gave in and realized that as much as I wanted students to read the textbook, they just weren't doing it. And I also realized that it kind of freed me up to just assign you the things that I want you to read. So there's no fluff or busy work or things like that. So I do want you to keep that in mind as we go. If I've assigned it to you to read, it's important, obviously. It's going to be tested. But keep in mind that I'm not requiring a textbook. I'm not having you read the textbook. So in exchange for that, I do want you to be very diligent about doing your assigned readings. They're not going to be very heavy. But it is important for our class discussion and for your understanding of what we do to have read the stuff that I assign. So this being a business law course, just a very quick overview of how this works. I want you to think of a second for the medical field, how many different doctors there are. You have foot doctors, you have cancer doctors, you have eye doctors. And all these doctors went to the same medical school, but after they got out of medical school, they're in these specialties. And you wouldn't go to a foot doctor if you needed brain surgery. So law is much the same way. There are areas of the law that I have very, very limited knowledge of. I don't do anything related with taxes. I couldn't give you any legal tax advice if you needed me to. Lawyers specialize like that as well. I've been practicing for longer than I want to admit, about 25 years now. And I have practiced in a bunch of different areas, and I've practiced in most of the areas that we touch. Nowadays, I am focused on child welfare law, so I mostly do adoptions, and I work in our juvenile courts some. And so that's not going to be directly relevant to your day-to-day business law necessarily, but in my 25 years of practice, I've touched most of the things that we're going to talk about here. One thing that makes this class a little bit difficult is business law encompasses so many different areas. I mean, we're talking about computers, we're talking about employment law, we're talking about contracts, we're talking about criminal law. And these are classes that at law school students are taking for at least a semester, usually a whole year. You spend a whole year on criminal law. You spend a whole year on evidence. You spend a whole year on constitutional law. We're hitting those in 1 week. So to say that we're just scratching the surface of all these subjects is maybe a little bit of an understatement. So my goal in this class, and your goal, I'm not trying to teach you the law. I don't want you to leave here knowing what the law is. That would be impossible for a lot of reasons. One, it's such a huge breadth of information. But also it's specialized. Georgia law and employment law is going to be different than Alabama employment law. They'll have a bunch of similarities, but they're going to be different. And so a lot of my online students are not in Georgia. A lot of you guys are going to leave college and go to different states. And so I'm not trying to teach you Georgia law. I want to teach you the general principles within each area of law so that you and your careers and your jobs can think to yourself, this is a contract law issue. This is an issue with the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is an issue with insider trading. And then so I want you to be able to spot issues and think critically through them and realize maybe kind of what issue it is and some of the general framework. But by no means are we going to teach you the letter of the law. As an adoption lawyer, I look at the Georgia adoption law every week. So I remember most of it, but we lawyers, I mean, a lot of it's in our heads, but we're always going back and reading the letter of the law and making sure that, that what we're doing is right and the information we're giving is correct. Also, the law changes. So that's another reason that we're not going to spend a lot of time on teaching you, making you memorize what the actual law is, because it is a dynamic and ever-changing thing. Just this summer, we've had a major Supreme Court decision on abortion, as everybody is aware of by now. And that changed the law. And that's obviously not business law, but just as an example that the law does change in some pretty big ways, in small ways and big ways. So we're going to hit a subject a week, pretty much. Some of the more important subjects, like employment law or contracts, we'll spend 2 weeks on, but pretty much we're going to fly through each subject as we go. And that's also good for y'all too, because you might think that contract law is really dull and boring, but it only lasted a week or two, and we'll be moving on to something hopefully more interesting. So that's another kind of plus of this class. Here's how I have structured the class for both online and in person. Every Tuesday morning, I will lecture on whatever area of law that we're taking for that week. So today, I'm going to talk about sources of law as soon as I finish this introduction. And then on Thursdays, sometimes I'll have a little more lecture to do if I haven't finished on Tuesday. But then on Thursdays, we're going to talk about the reading that I've assigned you. And we're going to talk about any of the information that is going to be on an assignment for that week. So for example, this week I've assigned to you the Brown versus Board of Education case, which if you guys remember anything about that, that is the Supreme Court case that ended segregation in public schools. This is back in the 50s. And so between now and Thursday, your job will be to read that case. It's not that long. And on Thursday, we'll discuss it in class. And then you'll have an assignment on it. But the assignment will cover what we discuss in class. So that's another reason I want you here, so that you can hear it. Almost everything that I ask you, we're going to talk about in class. So it's important that you come and take notes and pay attention to, what we say, because most of the answers on your assignment are going to be things that we talked about. I will give at least one assignment every week, sometimes two. I think one week we have three, but it's generally not more than one or two. And those are due on Monday nights at midnight. So we start a new week on Tuesday morning and we end our week on Monday night. So I usually do not bleed over your assignments or topics for one week into the next week. That way we hit it, we get it done right then while it's fresh on your mind, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So I want you to hear this is important too. Those assignments are due on Monday nights. I don't do late assignments. So if you have an issue, people have issues that come up, I need to hear that ahead of time. I'm always glad to work with people. Hey, I'm on an out of work conference, or something's going on. I'm glad to work with you on that, but I don't do 11 p.m. Monday night, hey, can I have an extension or something like that. That just means that you haven't planned your week well. And so that will be on you and not me. So that's kind of how it works. Every morning on Tuesday morning, like this morning, our content went live. There's nothing you'll need to do to prepare for Tuesday mornings necessarily. I post the lecture outline in your content module for each week. So if you have Cougar View pulled up now, you can pull up the lecture outline that I'm about to give you. And I do it in Word form, so that way you can take notes as we go. You take notes on your computer, obviously you can write them down, but that will help you follow along with the information that I'm trying to give you today. Let's see, any questions so far? Okay. I will post the lecture videos to the content module. So even though I'm doing these lecture videos for my online classes, if you do have to miss a class, you'll have access to my lecture video and you can watch it. And I would encourage you to do that because, for example, if somebody has to miss on Thursday and then you're going to have to complete the assignment for this week, you will have wanted to watch Thursday's lecture video because we're discussing what's on the assignment and you'll pick up a lot of the answers for your assignment. So make sure that you watch those. I have been putting them on YouTube. I think you can, or I know you can do them to Cougar View. I just haven't figured that out yet. You guys will also figure out that I try really hard when it comes to Cougar View and technology, but I fail a lot. And so I always appreciate text saying, hey, professor, we can't see this, or this is not unlocked or something like that, and I'll fix it as soon as I can. Grades and exams. So here's how we work. Typically, well, like I said, everything that I test you on is going to be in assignments every week. We don't do midterms. We don't do exams along the way. Pretty much, I want to test you that week on what we learned then. We will have a cumulative exam at the end of the semester, but I will tell you I give you a study guide of what's on it. So it's not just like, hey, it's 15 weeks of stuff, figure out what's on there. I will give you a list of the things that I want you to go back and look at that'll be on the exam. So it is cumulative in that sense, but it's going to be the areas that I think are most important and the areas that I really want you to focus on. So the grading scheme works like this. 85% of your grade is assignments. So we'll have at least one assignment a week. So you're going to have roughly 14, 15, 16 assignments that'll make up 85% of your grade. And then the final exam will be 15%. So that's how we work that. I do put up a discussion question in the discussion forums. If you don't know how to find that in our course thing, just let me know. But you are expected to answer those discussion questions every week, and you get an assignment grade for that. It's one grade for all of the assignments throughout the semester. All of the discussions throughout the semester. So let's say that, and some weeks we might not have one, but let's just say we had 10 discussion questions this semester. If you answered all 10 of them, then you will get a 100 for your discussions grade. If you answer 7 of them, then you'll get a 70 for your discussions grade. So it is important that you do that. And I have found and gotten feedback that students like the discussions and they like reading what other students write. And it's a way for us to kind of explore some things that we might not have the time that we want to have in class for. So that is important. This week's discussion question is already up. It's introduce yourself. Tell me where you're from, what year you are, what you're majoring in, what your plans are, that kind of thing. Okay, I already mentioned that I'm going to be calling on you. I will know your names, so there'll be no hiding. So let's, for example, the Brown versus Board of Education case that you're assigned for this week. When we come in Thursday morning and I finish up lecturing, then I'm going to start asking some of you randomly to tell me about certain aspects of that case. I don't expect you, I know you guys aren't lawyers. I'm not expecting you to necessarily know the right answers. I just want to know that you have read it and that you know enough about it to have a dialogue with me. So don't anybody freak out. I'm not giving zeros if I call on Miss Lehman and she doesn't know the answer. That's okay. So that's sort of how that works. Participation, there's not an exact participation grade, and I don't know how other professors do it, but when I get to the end of the semester and somebody's at 88, 87, 86, and they raise their hand in my class all the time and they participate, that's an easy A. Same for turning a C into a B or a D into a C. Similarly, if I've got somebody who's at 88 and I call on them and they never know the answer and it's clear they aren't doing their reading, then I'm not doing any favors on the grading. I guess I should back up on that. I just do the 90 to 100 as an A, 80 to 89 as B. But I do look at my grade distribution at the end. So there are typically a lot of high 80s end up being an A and so on and so forth. It just depends on my grade distribution and all that. So just because you didn't end up with a 90 doesn't necessarily mean you won't get an A. Or just because you didn't necessarily end up with an 80 doesn't mean you won't get a B. So keep that in mind as we go through. It is important to me that you participate and show interest and all that, and that very much factors into your grade. This goes without saying, but I have to say it all the time. Do not cheat. I take it personally, and I will fail you, and I'll report you. I had last fall, some students found an assignment that somebody posted on Chegg.com, and it was comically wrong. Like, it was 100%, the answers were all wrong. And like 8 or 9 people did it, and it was so obvious because everybody had this wrong answer. And everybody failed and got reported. So don't cheat in this class. I promise you I will fail you. I don't have any leeway or patience for that. I will also say I hope that it's hard to cheat in this class because I make up all my own tests. My tests change every semester depending on what new stuff we're doing. Nothing that I do is online. Like my test, my quiz questions, my assignments are not online. I am not testing you on anything that I didn't go over in this class or assign to you. So if you have copied and pasted something from the internet, it's obvious to me because that's not the way that I fed you the information or that we discussed it. There's no reason to look for anything on the internet. It will not do you any good in this class. So hopefully that'll be the only time we have to talk about that. A couple of tips. Don't wait till Monday night. I think I already mentioned that. I do know, I get it. I know I'm a deadline person too. A lot of you people will be doing your assignments on Monday night. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But let's just don't wait till 11:30 p.m. on Monday night. And you guys know too, we can see the time that you submitted your stuff. Like it shows, I'll see an assignment that's incomplete, and then I can look and be like, well, it's incomplete because they've submitted it at 11:59 p.m. on Monday night. So just I hope I'm doing you a favor by letting you know when everything is due and how this class works, and that you can plan with your other classes, with your jobs, with your personal lives to know that you got really Sunday night and Monday night. If you're like me, that's what I would do. I would wait till the end of the week. But you have Sunday nights and Monday nights really to get everything done. Take notes. puzzles me when I see people that don't take notes. I don't totally understand why you wouldn't take notes. But everybody learns differently, so I don't necessarily judge on that. You do how whatever works best for you. And then I love feedback. So if you have a question about anything, if something is confusing, if you are like, I don't like how you did that, I like criticism too. So the more that you can give back to me, the better I can make the class while we're here this semester and in future classes. It boggles my mind how many students don't ask questions or reach out to the professor. I have gone an entire semester with my online classes, and they will not ask a question. And that just blows my mind that people aren't more engaged with that. I set up a Zoom in the spring for my online class, just as a general, hey, we're going to, any questions, anything like that, and nobody joined. And so it didn't hurt my feelings so much as I just don't understand that. But if you're listening on my online class, if you're expecting an online class that is an independent study, you have come to the wrong place. What I'm expecting of you is almost as if you were in class with me twice a week. So if that's going to be a problem for anybody out there, listen to me online, go ahead and drop the class now, or go take Judge D'Antonio's class at 6 p.m. You might like that one better. All right, any questions that anybody has so far? No questions. All right. So I'm going to start with lecturing on our first topic, which is sources of law. Much of this is going to be, what time? Is that clock right? It's 10 what?
10:03.
So that clock is, that says 9:10. All right, so, and this class ends at 10:45? Is that right? Okay. All right, well, good. Y'all bear with me for 40 more minutes or so. Some of this week's may be a review of your high school civics. But I also recognize that we have a lot of international students. And so you may not be as familiar with the American form of government. So we're going to just have a quick review over all that. So everybody recall that the form of government that we have in the United States is we have a federal system of government that consists of our three branches of government on the federal level, which would be the executive branch, meaning our president, our legislative branch being Congress, and then our judicial branch being the Supreme Court. And those are all governed by the United States Constitution, the supreme law of the land. Everything that flows from a legal standpoint in our country goes all the way back to the Constitution. But our form of government is limited federal government in that, we've had a bigger role of the federal government over the years than when the founding fathers first started this. But the idea is that the federal government has certain powers, certain limited powers, and that all of the other powers to govern and make laws are left to the states, to the individual states themselves. And so states are free to make their own laws so long as their laws don't conflict with the Constitution, with the United States Constitution. So on every state level, we have the same three branches of government. In Georgia, we have the executive branch led by our governor. We have the legislative branch led by our state legislature. And then we have a court system in Georgia. Next week, we're going to get into how our court systems are set up. And it's a little confusing because there's overlap between the federal court system and each state's court system, but I'll save that for next week. So just a quick review of how we're set up. So concentrating today on sources of law. Where do our laws come from? There are a lot of different places that they do. Obviously, constitutional law flows, as you'd expect, from the Constitution. We have our United States Constitution at the federal level, and then each state has their own individual constitution. So some examples of law that come from the Constitution, from our U.S. Constitution. The right to freedom of speech. That's found in the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution. The right to not incriminate yourself in a criminal trial. That's found in the Constitution. So there are certain rights that the Constitution grants, and the source of those is obviously the Constitution, so henceforth, constitutional law. So that's one source of law. Another source is statutory law. So a statute is any law passed by a legislative body. So Congress, any law that Congress passes is a statute. The Americans with Disabilities Act is an example. Congress passed that law that governs how people with disabilities are treated, what rights they have in the workplace. That's a statute, that's statutory law. Any law that the Georgia legislature passes is a Georgia statute. It's Georgia statutory law. This does extend down to governmental levels lower than the state. The city of Columbus has Columbus City Council. They pass ordinances. That's statutory law. So that's another source of law. Laws that are passed by legislative bodies. Federal level, that would be Congress. On the state level, that would be our individual state legislatures. Statutes are found in code books. I'll bring one on Thursday if I can remember. But it's thick, and they're divided into each chapter by each subject of law. Nowadays, all this is online. So if you want to look up a statute, you just Google it. And you can find it right away. It used to be back in my olden times that we were always looking in the books and cross-referencing and getting from this book to this book, and it was a lot more of a pain than it is now to just have it right at your fingertips. But they're kept in code books. So the United States Code is made up of statutes that Congress has passed. The Georgia Code is made up of statutes that the state legislature has passed. So that's statutory law. There's also an area of law called administrative law. And administrative law comes from administrative agencies. And here's some examples of that. So when I mentioned that we have our three branches of government, and we have the executive branch, who is in charge of carrying out the business of government. Our executive branch has created agencies to help them carry out the law. For example, the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, is a federal agency. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, the Food and Drug Administration. These are all agencies of the federal government. Now, on the state level, we have agencies too. We have the Georgia Department of Revenue. We have the Georgia Department of Wildlife. We have agencies at all levels of government. Agencies can make law. And it's not statutory law because it's not been passed by Congress or state legislature. It's not constitutional law because it's not found in any constitution. But agencies make rules. Is what their law is called rules. And they're just as binding on companies and citizens as a statute, as the Constitution, as all other sources of law. So for example, the IRS has their own set of rules. It's not going to be found in the U.S. Code because it's not a statute passed by Congress, but it is the law nonetheless. The Environmental Protection Agency has rules that they have made about what kind of emissions companies can make without getting into trouble, like your discharge into the air or water or things like that. Those are absolutely law just as much as anything else. They're just not as familiar to us by definition as some of these other things. They're punishable by fines or sometimes by prison sentences, some of these violations, but they're every bit as enforceable and every bit as legitimate as laws as any other source. Anybody have to work with OSHA regulations at your business, at your job? Anybody familiar with that? If you look in the break room, there's always these things they're required to post about some OSHA rules and regulations and stuff, but that's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And they have all kinds of rules and regulations about how cold your freezer is, how wide your doorways are, you name it, they've regulated it. And so that is every bit, as I said, a source of law as anywhere else. So that is administrative law. You'll notice in your outline for this week, if there's an area that's grayed out, I'm not covering it and you're not responsible for it. I just didn't want to delete it from my outline, but if it's in gray, you don't need to worry about it. Case law is the other source of law that I want you to be familiar with. And here's how it works. Our courts, one of the job of our courts is to interpret the law if there's a dispute about what the law says. So, for example, in the Constitution, it says that we have the right to freedom of speech. We all know that there are some limits on that. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Hate speech is against the law. But you will not see that in the Constitution anywhere. The source of those qualifiers or modifiers or interpretations of what our right to free speech means is when courts have had the cases come before them, is burning the flag freedom of speech? Is a symbol that I wear on my shirt, is that speech? Because it's not spoken? How does all that fit into the Constitution's guarantee of freedom of speech? So the courts interpret the laws. So if we have a court that says you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater, that's the law. And we call that case law because that comes from a court having a case and making a decision on that case in a written opinion. And those written opinions that judges issue are law. They're binding on us too. That's case law. And if you think about it, Congress could pass a statute, let's say with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they could define as best they could what a disability is. But there's no way Congress could list every single condition that's a disability. There's no way that we can make a list of 10,000 pages long, and I guarantee you the one thing that'll come up is something that we didn't put on our list. So there's no way to make a law and cover every possibility, interpretation. There's no way to know how a law written today is going to be interpreted in the future. Some laws we have were written before computers or before the internet. And obviously, we've got to have courts interpret those laws now to say how that applies in the area of the internet. For example, we're going to read a case later on that talks about is it legal for the police to get your GPS tracking data from your cell phone company without a warrant? Is that a search that's prevented under the Constitution? And that was something that when the Constitution was written, we had no idea that we were going to be able to know where everybody is at every second by tracking their cell phone location movements, right? But we've got to have courts now interpret how that law should be applied and what it means in today's society. So the courts will often do that. There's nothing to stop a legislative body like Congress or a state legislature from passing a law to fix an area in the law where there has been some question. Like, there's nothing stopping Congress from passing a law that says you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. They could do that. So it's not like once they make a law that it's up to the courts from there on out to interpret it and rule. I mean, Congress can always make their laws and adjust accordingly. One example is that, and I won't try to get too far off track, but when the abortion decision came down, there was some language in that case that suggested that marriage equality might be in jeopardy in the future. And so Congress, there's been talk that Congress would look at passing a federal law that protects marriage equality. Because right now, the right to same-sex marriage is, that was a Supreme Court decision interpreting the Constitution. So there's not a federal statute that governs marriage. So that's just an example. I'm not testing you on that. I just want you to see the example of the interplay between what Congress can do and then how the court would interpret a law. Congress can pass all the laws they want, but if they're not constitutional, the Supreme Court will strike them down as being unconstitutional. So that just goes along with our whole system of checks and balances. But there's a lot of interplay in that. So I know that that can be confusing, all these different sources of law. Constitutions, statutes, local ordinances, state statutes, case law, administrative law. We're just throwing a whole bunch of different sources of law at you. So as we go through the course, a lot of what we talk about these first 2 weeks we'll refer back to throughout the rest of the course. So whenever we have something come up that's case law, whenever we have something come up that's statutes, I always identify that and make sure that we're tracking on remembering how our sources of law work. Case law, and I won't get too deep into this, but case law evolved from the common law doctrine, the system in England on which our government is based and our judicial system is based. But it used to be that centuries ago, there was not any written statutes. There was not a code book of the law. It was just whatever the judges decided on each individual case. But judges, but what they did was you were supposed to follow what other judges did in the same situation. And that was how they got uniformity in the law. That was known as the common law system in England. That's sort of how we got to where we are. There's still some common law element to it, but nowadays we do have written books of the law and we can look them up at our fingertips. So it's a lot easier to have uniformity that way. But that's sort of where all that came from. But an important part of the common law doctrine is that our judges and our courts are supposed to follow the decisions that have come before. That idea is it's a Latin term called stare decisis. It's important for you to know that. The idea of stare decisis is that in order to promote predictability, fairness, uniformity in the application of the law, that courts will follow case law and written decisions that other courts have made. So would it be fair if a court in Georgia decided that it was okay to yell fire in a crowded theater, but a court in Alabama said that it wouldn't? So we want our courts to follow. Yes, sir?
What was that foreign word that you said?
The Latin word?
Yes.
Stare decisis. Yep. And you'll see that in your outline. But good question. So, what I want you to know is that's the idea that courts should follow previous decisions, precedent. The idea of following precedent. And if you think about it, our society and our business law, our business world would be chaotic if we didn't have this idea of following precedent. If we had no idea what a court was going to do, we wouldn't be able to plan our activities and make decisions about what's best for ourselves and our businesses if we didn't have some idea of what the courts are going to do. Now, stare decisis is a general principle. The following of precedent is a general principle. But it does not mean that courts are forever bound by previous decisions. A great example of that is the abortion case from this summer. The right to an abortion was given by the Supreme Court in the Roe versus Wade decision years and years and years ago. That was precedent. And in all the years that followed, the courts, all the courts that considered questions having to do with abortion were bound by the Supreme Court's case law decision in Roe versus Wade by stare decisis. Courts can depart from precedent. They can overturn precedent. They can decide that a case should be decided a different way. It does happen. That's what happened in the abortion case this summer. So even though our general system is built on the idea that courts will follow precedent, it does not mean that they are bound to. Now, courts can't just abandon precedent for no good reason. They can't just say, we just want to decide this differently. They've got to articulate good, sound legal reasons for doing so. Society has changed. This law that was passed in the 1920s needs updating. It's not applicable these days. We need to overturn some precedent. We'll talk on Thursday about probably the best example, or one of the best examples, which is the Brown versus Board of Education case. And up until that case, it was legal in our country to have separate but equal schools for the races, separate but equal in quotes. That was the law of the land. Courts had decided over the years that that was constitutional. The case in the Brown case finally made it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know what? This is no longer, this is not how the law should be anymore. Times have changed. Education is important. Separate but equal has no place in our country anymore. This was a law that was passed in the 1800s, and the way that society was set up then is not the same way. There's a lot of reasons, and we'll get into them on Thursday. But that's just an example of how courts can depart from precedent if they have a good reason, and it does happen. But generally speaking, the idea of stare decisis is that courts will follow the precedent of past cases. I want you to appreciate the difference between civil law and criminal law. So I mentioned earlier that there are all these different, there are a million specialties within the law, which is true. But each of these specialties falls into really one of the general areas of criminal law or civil law. Criminal law, you're familiar with that. That is the law that governs the behavior and expectations that society has on individuals and on businesses. It is generally punishable by fines or imprisonment. The purpose is to punish, to deter future people from doing wrong. That's criminal law. So in a criminal case, it's always between a government and the person who's alleged to have committed the crime. We'll get into the names for that next week. But those cases are always going to be the United States versus Tebow. If I violate a criminal law, that would be the case. If I violate a state law, it would be the state of Georgia versus Tebow. That's criminal law. Everything that's not criminal law is civil law. So civil law governs the rights and responsibilities of citizens to each other, businesses to each other, of the government to citizens. If I get in a car wreck and I've got to sue the insurance company, you know how that works, that's civil law. If I enter into a contract with somebody and they break it and I sue them, that's civil law. If I have an employment discrimination case that I want to bring against my employer, that's civil law. So when we talk about civil law, that's really anything that's not criminal law. Civil law does not involve jail time. It does not involve criminal fines or penalties or stuff like that. It's just rights and responsibilities between citizens or between businesses and citizens, sort of in the private realm. I've talked already, looking at section 4 on the outline, we've already talked about the separation of powers and how the government's set up. The supremacy clause, that is found in the Constitution, and basically what it says is that the Constitution and laws and treaties of the United States government are the supreme law of the land, so no state laws can conflict with federal laws. On Thursday, we are going to go through the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And that's where you find most of the stuff that you're familiar with, like the right to a speedy trial, the right to not be tried twice for the same crime, the right to freedom of speech, religion, the freedom to gather, all that kind of stuff. We're going to go over that Thursday just because I just feel like it's important for y'all to have a quick refresher on that. Your outline gets into a little bit on freedom of speech that we find in the First Amendment. What I want you to know about that is that corporations can speak also, even though they're not a human. But the law treats a business entity as a person for purposes of the law. So sole proprietorship, a partnership, a huge corporation, they are all subject to the same laws that you and I are as people, as individual humans. But corporations' right to freedom of speech is more limited than our individual right to freedom of speech. Commercial speech through advertising, branding, anything that corporations or businesses put out is protected by the First Amendment, obviously, but it's a little bit more limited. We just don't have time to get into the nuances and the nitty-gritty of corporate political speech, commercial speech, but I just want you to know that that is a little bit more limited in its freedoms than just our individual right to freedom of speech. And why that's important is that in your business careers, I don't want you to get in there and think that that your business can say anything that it wants. Just need to be conscious that you may have a few more limitations than you might as an individual. The idea I'm skipping over to section 6. The idea of due process is a concept that's found in the Constitution. And what that means is, you've probably heard this phrase a lot. What that generally means is fairness. Everybody is guaranteed the right to due process. So in the legal sense, that means that if you're charged with a crime, or if somebody sues you in a civil case, you have the right to know what you're being charged with. You have the right to see the evidence that's going to be used against you. You have the right to a lawyer. You have the right to be heard. All these are protections that are built in as fairness. The opposite of that, I would suggest to you, is like what's going on in Russia now, where they're having some trials of some of the Ukrainian soldiers that they captured, and there's absolutely no due process. They're not being afforded, an impartial jury or their own lawyers or all these other things. So the idea of due process is just that the government can't take action against me without a fair process to it. And that's built into laws, whether it's criminal law or civil law. You find that throughout the law. All right, any questions on sources of law? I will bring up things like, I've mentioned today the abortion decision, and from time to time I will bring up some like hot button issues, but I don't do politics in this class. So when I bring up stuff like that, it's purely from the standpoint of explaining to you why the Supreme Court said what it said, or if we end up talking about that abortion case more. I want you just to understand from a legal standpoint what the court said and what they based it on. We're not going to get into whether you believe in it or not. I just don't find that any kind of political discussion or stuff like that's productive for our class. So I just ask that we all try to maybe stay away from that. I do want to bring in current event stuff. I just don't ever want to get bogged down in, I'm a very apolitical person. I can't stand it. And so I just don't do well in that. But I also believe that as a society, we have gotten where we don't tolerate other people's views, and that drives me crazy too. I can disagree with you, but I can respect your right to believe what you want to believe. And I wish that we all could be that way, but I think that's all I'm going to say about that. All right, any questions? So for Thursday, if you haven't read the outline, I would encourage you just to go back and review that. If you've taken notes on it today, that's great. But go back and do that. Read the Brown versus Board of Education case article that's put up. And then, is there anything else posted on Cougar View besides those two things? The Bill of Rights is posted, right? Yes, go ahead and look at that. And just be able to pull it up on Thursday. Yes, ma'am.
You wanted us to do discussion too, right?
Yes, the discussion question is already posted. And you can do your discussion questions anytime. But because I don't go every week and see who did them. I mean, I go at the end of the semester and count how many you did. But I do read them every week. So I mean, if you wait till the end of the semester to answer all your discussion questions, I'm going to know. But the one this week is introduce yourself. It should already be posted. You don't have to share anything you're not comfortable sharing, but anything you want us to know about you is great. And I'll tell you, another reason I like doing that is in spring semester, I had a person that was a motivational speaker. And so I would never have known that if we hadn't done these introductions. So we ended up getting him to do some motivational speaking for us throughout the semester, and it was really cool. So, and I've found out that some people like baking, so we get them to bring in some, goodies for us throughout the semester. But if you have any special talents, anybody wants to sing, recite poetry, or anything like that, we're always welcome to keep it light. All right, if there are not any more, yes, sir.
No, I'm just stretching out, hit chest days.
Dude behind you.
You did say all the material post on Cougar View.
Yep, it will be. It's all posted there. So nothing you do not need to buy anything, no outside sources. If I want you to read it, I post it. Yes, ma'am.
And going back to the discussion, do we need to respond to anybody with the discussion?
You don't have to. There's no requirement for that. I do love to see all that, but there's no points on or off for doing that.
So you just want us to do it?
Just do it. Yep. Your assignment is to answer the question. I am going to ask you, next week's question is ask a lawyer. You can ask me any question you want. And it takes me the rest of the semester to answer all of them because there's like 90-something students I have. But I love this because people ask all kind of stuff that, if you've always wanted to ask. Obviously not like personal stuff like can you get me out of my speeding ticket? But the most often one I get is tell me about how people represent criminals that they know are guilty, stuff like that. But anyway, so we'll talk through that. Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to have a word count, like a specific word count?
No, there's no word count. No. Just good faith. Some people have a lot to say. Some people don't have a lot to say. And I can tell if you put effort into it or not. But no, I don't expect you to spend an hour every week on your discussion question. It's really just another way for me to get you thinking about something that we don't have time in class to talk about. I just thought of one more thing, but I forgot it. So I'll see you guys on Thursday.